Hello and welcome to another Property Solvers podcast. This is Ruban Selvanayagam, one of the directors here at Property Solvers. I'm here with James Durr. How are you doing, James?
Hello, everyone. I'm good. Yourself, Ruben?
All good. Okay, so today we're going to go for a topic that James has suggested. And the topic is making offers on property. So we're going to approach this from a couple of different angles. One is from the kind of investor auction buyer point of view, and the other is from via an estate agent or from an estate agent. So, James, do you want to kind of kick off with what you are kind of hoping to kind of explore today?
Yeah. Thanks, Ruben. I think a lot of people struggle with making offers, especially when they're at the start of their property journey. It's something that people don't know exactly how to approach. And that goes for, especially like when you're dealing with estate agents. So we just wanted to do like a little bit of a dive on how to approach an offer with estate agents to ensure that they take you seriously and that you can get your offer to the top of the pile, because obviously estate agents are dealing with a lot of different offers. Their job, as we know, because we're on both sides of the coin, is to separate the good offers and the serious investors from the time wasters. So we want to look at it from that perspective. And we also want to look at it from an estate agent's perspective, because we ourselves, like when we're making offers to vendors, we need to also sort of make a case for what offer is good, what offer is bad, and sort of explore a little bit about what makes a good offer. How do you make a case for an offer, when you should actually encourage a seller to take an offer, and when you should encourage a seller to hold out to get a higher price. So if we start off with an investor, from an investor point of view, I mean, when I first started my property journey, I had heard a lot of information and read information about how to present offers. And some of them were quite out there. You know, they'd be like, type up a letter on headed paper saying you're a property company and attach a check to that letter for the deposit. Now, I actually tried that back in the day, and the estate agent almost laughed at me because this is something that was like, I read it in some American book, and it's kind of gimmicky. And like really estate agents aren't going to take something like that seriously.
So you were sending the full deposit as a check, essentially.
I was sending the deposit as a check. Now, whether that check would have bounced or not is a different story, because at the time I wasn't earning much. I was just straight out of university. So
yeah. Well, if you don't try,
yeah,
you know, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think when you are dealing with estate agents, what estate agents are interested in is, number one, like how quickly can you move, right? So obviously when they're dealing with a lot of buyers, a lot of people are making offers, and a lot of people will be in chains, and some buyers will make offers, and we've come across this a lot, Ruben, as you know. They'll make offers when their property isn't even on the market.
Yeah.
And at this stage, like, we don't even do viewings for buyers if their property isn't on the market, because it's an absolute waste of time.
We also get the hobbyist property viewers who haven't got any intention of actually buying. You know, they're kind of booking in the property, especially if a property's just been refurbed. They're always kind of having a little look around, just having a bit of a nose. You know,
you get a lot of nosy neighbours.
Yeah.
You know, you get wannabes that just like maybe wannabe developers, like we were back in the day. Let's be honest. But you know, you get people coming around just for a look, just to see, you know, what other people are doing. And yeah, you need to find a way to sort of sort the wheat from the chaff with those offers. So what we do with an offer as an estate agency is we're basically interested in, does the buyer have the cash? Do they have a mortgage in principle for the loan amount of the property they're looking to buy? And how quickly can that client move? So obviously, if you were an investor and you approach an estate agent and you find a property that you like, you know, you might want to say to them, like, I've spoken to a broker, I've got a mortgage in principle, I'm actually a cash buyer. If you are a cash buyer, if you're using bridging, you can also be effectively, you're a cash buyer, but you're chain free, and you're ready to complete in sort of 3 to 4 weeks. So you've got, I mean, what do you need to be able to complete in 3 to 4 weeks? You need your solicitor ready. So you need to have a strong power team behind you. That's a good solicitor who's used to dealing with quick sales, who can complete in 3 to 4 weeks. Now, obviously, at the moment, that's a little bit more difficult because lenders are taking a while to get mortgage offers out. I mean, it can be maybe 6 weeks. But I mean, initially, at those initial steps, you just want to show them you're chain free, you've got your mortgage in principle sorted, you've got your deposit, so you can provide proof of funds in the bank for the deposit that you need to buy the property that you're after. And you're ready to go with solicitors, and everything is in place to complete the property sale, and you've got experience in buying properties quick.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, a cash buy, being in a cash buying position is the best way forward. You're not really relying on mortgage offers, because what's happening at the moment is that a lot of mortgage offers are going out, or people have their mortgage in principle in place or AIP in place. And the lenders are moving the goalposts all the time. And that's just a reflection of where we are in the lending market at the moment. So
you need
to make sure it's current as well,
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like the absolute best position you can be is in cash. Not every investor, especially when you're starting out, are going to be in a position where, let's say, even if you're buying a property that's 100 to 150,000, like a buy to let in, let's say, the Midlands or up north, a lot of people don't have that sort of cash. But remember, there are other avenues open to you if you want to be in a cash position. For example, you can use investor finance, so you can work with other investors that maybe are cash rich but time poor, and you can borrow off them, give them a return like somewhere between 7 to 12%, depending, or you can give them an equity slice of the deal. 50-50 is very common, so the investor would put up 100% of the money, you split the profits 50-50. So that's one way to be in cash. The other thing you can do is, as I mentioned before, you can borrow bridging finance. And bridging finance is super quick. I mean, we use Together Finance quite a bit for some of our purchases, and we can get an offer in 2 to 3 weeks. So they're quick, and bridging also effectively puts you in a cash position because you don't have to wait for a mortgage. So a mortgage that might take sort of 6-7 weeks, you can get done in 2 weeks. But obviously the rates are high. I mean, typically you'd be paying 1% a month. The deal has to be good enough for you to pay those rates. But if it's a question, let's say you come across a property and they need the deal done in 2 to 3 weeks, and let's say it's worth 100,000, you can buy it for 70,000. You can go to a bridger, and you can get that done in the 2 to 3 weeks, as long as all the other elements are set up in terms of like your solicitors, and they're on board and they're used to dealing with quick cash sales. You can buy that property and secure yourself a great deal and a great discount.
Yeah. And bridging rates aren't that bad at the moment. They haven't actually increased in the same way as mortgage rates have. There is a risk because, you need to make sure that you've got an exit in place with the property. So whether that would be refurbishing it and reselling it, or if you're just going to trade it straight on like we often do, or you're going to, maybe make it a buy-to-let or an HMO or whatever your plan is. Just make sure that you've got a firm, where you're going to go with the property, and you're not just going to let it run on a bridge, because those costs can accumulate over time. And also remember that you will have an arrangement fee to deal with as well, and probably extra legal fees to take into account. So yeah, it's worth bearing that in mind. They're a great way to sell funds quickly, but there are risks.
For sure. And also, I mean, if you overrun on bridge and finance, it can be extremely expensive. Yeah. So sometimes people use bridging to buy and refurb. and it works well for that. But if you go over to the 12 months, let's say, I mean, you can usually get a bridge for 6 or 12 months. If you go over the 12 months, the fees can be extortionate. So there definitely is risks that you need to be aware of when using bridge and finance.
Yeah. So James, how would you think differently with regards to what we do primarily, which is the direct to vendor approach? How would your approach vary?
So a direct to vendor approach, obviously with the direct to vendor approach, it's a lot more about building rapport in the first place. But when it comes to actually making the offer to the vendor, it's a question of just like, some people are very nervous about making low offers. But the reality is, if you want to be a professional property investor, you will need to buy at a price where there's margin involved. So there's you can either buy low or you can add value, or a combination of both, ideally. So when making an offer to a vendor, I think the best thing to do is to be able to justify, first of all, the valuation of the property. What we do typically is, after the first call, we'll collect data on the property itself. So what sort of property it is, how much work is needed, what the square meterage is, and we'll have a look at sort of direct comparables in that street and around the area,
in order
to derive the market value.
Sorry to interrupt, James. Yeah, all this information is completely free, widely available online. So it's accessible.
Yeah, and Rightmove house sales, Rightmove house prices, and sold prices also are very good for checking out comps. So once you have the valuation, that's the first stumbling block you need to get across with the vendor, because often vendors will think that the property is worth a lot more than it is. And Ruben, we know that 50% of our vendors, maybe even higher, they come to us and they've been told an overinflated valuation by an estate agents, because often estate agents want to give the owners an impression that they can get them more money. Because obviously, if you're in a position where you're selling a house and one agent tells you, oh, I can get you 150 for the house, whereas another one says, look, it's only worth 125, 9 out of 10 vendors will go for the one that says that they can get them 150, even though that valuation may be well overinflated. So I think the first step when you're dealing with the vendor is to come to agreement on the valuation. And the way you do that is you do your own due diligence on what the property is worth. So you look at comps, what they're selling for in similar condition in the area, similar size. You can look at the EPC for condition and sort of more information on the energy rating and stuff like that to get an idea of how much work is needed on it. It will also tell you what the square meterage is of that property. And once you've done the work on the valuation, you can call or sit down with the vendor and go through with them the comps that you've used to come up with the valuation. So let's say you're dealing with, number 211 City Road, for example, and you would talk to the vendor and you'd say, okay, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith or whoever you're dealing with, we've had a look at comparables in the area. Yours is a 3-bed terraced house. It needs a little bit of work. The kitchen and the bathroom haven't been changed for, let's say, 5 years. If we look at sold comps, we can see that number 207 sold for 110 in 2020. We've got number 215 sold for 115,000, similar condition to your own. That was in 2022. We feel that was sort of towards the top end of the market. And present maybe 5 to 6 comps of properties in the area that have sold, and use those to sort of agree with the vendor what their property is worth. So you'd say, based on the sort of evidence and what properties have sold for, and also what they're selling for on the market at the moment, we feel the value of your property is X. let's say 125,000 or 115,000. And that's the first step. So the first step is to get them to agree to your evaluation and to see that you've done your homework on what that property is worth, and they understand where you've come from with the valuation. So, for example, if that property was listed at 160,000, you would be in a position to say, look, obviously it's listed at 160,000. It's been on for 3 months. Like, there's been very little interest in terms of, like, you said that there's been like 2 viewings, no offers. Like, we think maybe that the estate agents lead you down the garden path a little bit in terms of what we feel is achievable for the house in this market. We've looked at the comparables in the area. These are the figures that we have, and this is what we feel is the true valuation of the property in the current market, right? And I think a lot of vendors will appreciate the work that you've done, and also, they'll be interested in how you've arrived at the valuation, and impressed that you've done the work to show them like what it's actually worth.
Right.
And so once you've got that valuation, then you can make your offer. So you can say, like, typically whatever your discount is. So, typically for us as a business, we buy at, let's say, 75 to 80% of market value, for example. So we would say, look, based on the valuation of 115 or whatever, we typically pay 75% of the market value, which, what's 75%? How's your maths, Ruben?
Of 160, did you say?
115,000 would be about 85,000, right? So we would say, okay, Mrs. Smith, like, we've had a look at the comps. We feel the value of your property is 115,000. Typically, we pay 75% of the value of the property. We do pay all the legals. I mean, we pay legal fees. There's no estate agent fees to pay. But our offer would be in the region of 85,000. How does that sound? Or is that an offer that would work for you? Right? And once you present the offer, most investors, what they will do is they'll just keep talking, because to make an offer, sometimes it's low. You feel a bit awkward, and sometimes there's a long silence after you make that offer. But what you have to do is make sure to just be quiet and let them speak, because it's one of the biggest mistakes that investors make. When you keep speaking, you don't hear how that seller reacts to your offer. You don't, like, it's one of the best times to see, like, do they reject it straight out of hand? Like, absolutely not. Or they're like, it's a bit low, maybe that gives you, that's great gauge for like how close you are to what they want. So it's very important not to break that silence. And I think you had a term for, Ruben, like a pregnant pause.
Yeah. Also, just to add to that, a couple of things with regards to, my own experience listening to the sales calls that come in every day. I often notice that, people compare their properties with others, and most people are kind of looking in their local neighborhood to see what other properties have sold. And often it's a case of kind of going through the actual situation with people. So finding out what their true motivations are with regards to selling, and kind of establishing what they actually want to achieve as their end goal, and kind of having a bit of a conversation, being friendly and not actually thinking about the deal, and just thinking about what they actually want to achieve. And I think that's where we're slightly different at Property Solvers, because if we see that the seller is not particularly motivated and they've got quite a bit of time on their hands, we wouldn't push them down that road of a cash sale, because it's just not going to make sense for them. Why force them to do something that doesn't make sense? If we were in that situation, we wouldn't be expected to kind of go down that route either. And so as people are looking at other properties, they often forget that their property might have not been touched for 15, 20 years, but they still think it's the same value as a property that's just been refurbed up the road, So it goes back to that education point that you were making, James, just kind of talking through and having like an open conversation. You don't have to be salesy all the time. You can just kind of just say, look, well, that property, if you have a look, that, you can just see that their kitchen was just done to a really high standard. So, by all means, if you were to refurbish your kitchen to that level, then absolutely we can get get the price up and boost the market value of it. But, it's just kind of showing them a little bit of realism, really. And that often
and I think
people let their guards down,
Yeah, I think also, Ruben, just to add to that, I think like we could do a whole podcast on just dealing with vendors and dealing with vendor calls. Like it is such a big topic, and there's so much to do to talk about with it. Like our process at Property Solvers is we do it across 2 calls. So the first call is all about discovery, and like you said, building rapport, seeing what their objectives are. And presenting what we do, how we do it. And then the second call is actually presenting the offer, which is kind of more what I've concentrated on in this podcast. But if you do want to hear more about dealing with vendors and how to approach sort of first calls with vendors, then maybe you could leave a comment under the video, and we could do a whole separate podcast on that.
Because there's a number of different situations, like financial difficulty scenarios are ones where it's good to have a bit of knowledge about the law with regards to repossession, so then you can advise them accordingly. There's a number of there's kind of FCA regulations and things like that in place, and if you can show them that you've got the knowledge of how to kind of handle that kind of situation, you're putting yourself in a very strong position in terms of being able to move them forward. Even if it just doesn't involve you buying the property, you're just helping them. And you'll probably end up with a really good review and that kind of thing, So it's really just educating yourself as well and becoming across as a true professional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing, Ruben, that we said we would talk about, which I find quite interesting and something that we've dealt with in-house as well today, is like if you're an estate agent, like how do you differentiate in terms of like when you're speaking to your vendors, like when to push an offer and when to sort of hold back and say, look, I think we can get more money than this.
Yeah. So what would you suggest?
So just like, for example, today, like we do auctions as well, right? And so we've got a good idea coming up to an auction. Let's say the auction is closing. And let's say, for example, we've got a property let's say it's closing for auction in 3 days. And we can see the number of buyers who've registered for that auction. And let's say we get a pre-auction offer, right? So the question is like, when do we push that offer? And when do we say to the vendor, look, I think we should go to auction? This is just to give people a different perspective of the other side of the coin. So, for example, today we had an offer on a property that's going to auction. It's a cheap property. We had an offer that came in at the reserve price for that property,
which was undisclosed.
Now, which is what? Sorry, Ruben?
Undisclosed. So the buyer didn't.
It's undisclosed. So we're looking at what the interest has been. So we can approach the vendor and decide whether or not he should take that offer. So in this case, the auction is closing in 3 days. And we can see that the number of viewings have been quite low. So there's been 6 viewings and there's only 1 registration for the auction. So clearly this is a case where we want to go to the vendor and we want to make a case to that vendor for accepting the pre-auction offer. So basically what we want to do is this is a similar thing to dealing with vendors in a certain way, because you still have to present the case for why that offer should be accepted. So when we're speaking to the vendor, we'll talk about the amount of viewings. We'll say, look, we've rang around all the viewers that viewed the property so far. They mentioned that, there was this thing wrong, it needed too much work. They're not interested, the location is not right. And as it stands, we're 3 days from the auction and we've got the only person that's registered has made an offer at the reserve. So we think that you should take that offer, because the other thing that will happen is if you don't take the offer and we go to auction and that property remains unsold, what do you think that buyer is going to do when they see that the property hasn't sold at the guide price? In this instance, the guide and the reserve are the same, which is not always the case, but in this instance, it is the case. So you need to sort of influence that vendor at that point that this is a good offer and they should take the offer pre-auction, because otherwise they're going to be in a position where they might have to take less post-auction. Yeah. Now, if the scenario is different, and let's say we've had a lot of viewers, and let's say we know that there's like 7, 8 buyers signed up to bid on this auction, we would then say, look, an offer's come in at the reserve, but we actually think that you should wait because there's 7 or 8 people who've registered for this auction. We think it's going to go over, and we think it's a better idea, and you'll get more money if you hold out. So it's a similar sort of thing, and it's the same with estate agency, right? So when you get bids through the estate agents, like a lot of the time, it depends on like whether or not you convince a seller to take it. Obviously, depends on the amount of interest in that particular property.
Yeah, and we can see that for ourselves. When we put on a property that's getting a lot of calls coming through, people are kind of. We put a property on the market a few weeks ago, and we were just inundated with calls. It was just unbelievable, actually. Yeah, being inundated with that. So, we just know that we're gonna achieve the best possible price for the seller because that's our job. So yeah, of course. But we get the best outcome for the seller. So if there's not much demand, we've got to convey that to them, and say, look, actually, we're limited here with our options. So we really not take what we can get, but, do our best.
Yeah. But also you can use that knowledge of the other side with estate agents when you're an investor, because like, let's say you're interested in a property, like a key question to ask the agent is, has there been much interest in that property, And you can go down as deep as just ask them, like, how many viewings has it had? Has it had any offers? And that information helps you to build a picture yourself of, how much interest there is in that property and what sort of offer you can make, because you can gauge sort of like, you can also ask a question about the owner, like what's their position, find out if the owner is motivated, like what's the reason for sale.
And most agents will begin to start talking to you if they're struggling to sell that particular property. They may be closed if there's a lot of demand, but if they know that they need to shift that one off their books, they're more likely to open up a bit more of a dialogue with you. So.
But the thing is, actually, like if you ask agents those kind of questions, like what's the reason the owner's selling and how much viewings has it had, they'll know that you know what you're talking about, because even that will separate you from like a novice or a first-time buyer. Like they'll know, okay, this person is an investor. Like these sort of questions only an investor would ask. So I think as an investor or someone who wants to come across as professional to an estate agent, these are really good questions to ask and can help you in offering the right amount for the property and gauging how motivated the seller is.
Yeah, and then you go in with everything that you mentioned earlier, James, with regards to your proof of funds, your cash if you've got that, or your bridging offer, and you can show that you're ready to move. It'll put you in a really strong position in that kind of scenario. Sure.
Yeah.
Good stuff. 100%. Good stuff. Well, we've talked about half an hour now, so we'll wind things up.
Hopefully that's enough.
Yeah,
that's enough for people to.
We're only planning to do
at
15 minutes today. Yeah. Okay. So if there's any topics that anyone wants to listen to us waffle on about, feel free to leave comments below. Always remember to like and subscribe. And thanks for listening. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.